Welcome to the Stronger Than Steel podcast with your host, Austin Davidson and John Keir, talking Steelers all the time. Now, here's Austin and John.
Hello, and welcome back to the Stronger Than Steel podcast. My name is John Keir, and today we have a special edition of the Stronger Than Steel podcast. As our listeners know, I like to have on someone that can talk a little bit about the opposing team every now and then, give us a little bit of a perspective on what the other team is kind of looking at and kind of how they're doing this season. And if you paid attention last season, right around the divisional playoff round, the Steelers played the Jacksonville Jaguars, and a good friend of mine, Josh Farnsworth, was nice enough to come on and talk about that game, and then again was able to talk about the AFC Championship game with the New England Patriots. So I want to welcome Josh Farnsworth back to the show. How you doing today, Josh?
I'm doing good, John. How are you?
Not too bad, not too bad. The weather, as we were talking beforehand, is not great up here. Quite the opposite of what it is down in West Palm, huh?
Yeah. We actually just got our first cold front. We're getting a high of 71.
Oof. Oh man. Well, if the Jacksonville Jaguars 2017 season was a nice sunny day of 75 degrees, well, their 2018 team would be more like the cold, snowy front that we've been getting up in western New York today.
Yep.
Just a few minutes away, one score away from an appearance in Super Bowl 52 back in January. It really looked like the 2018 team was heading back in that direction after they trounced the New England Patriots in Week 2, 31-20. But since then, the Jaguars are just 1-6. It's on everybody's mind, but what happened to this team?
Well, I think there's a few things that you could really point your finger on. There's been an outstanding amount of injuries. I think there's a total of 16 players on the IR. One of them is your, star-studded offensive line. You have Linder that just hit the IR this past week. Cam Robinson hitting the IR back shortly after the Patriots game. And his replacement, Wells, went down shortly after that. And then, it's just been a rotational door at the offensive line. And then, of course, you throw in, the heart of your offense, Fournette. He had that injury to his hamstring in game one and came back against the Jets and played, a couple series, but really wasn't himself. We finally got him back last week, and it looks like he's, back at his normal form. But as far as a difference between the two teams, the 2017 and 2018, I think you really point your finger at the defense. If you go back and you watch the way that they played last year, they played a lot of man, and then throw the four-man rush at the quarterback and try to see if you can get those picks. But this year it seems like they're playing on their heels a little bit more. Playing zone a lot more, and when you have the clientele like what they have on defense, I think it's a serious problem when you're playing zone when you have a defense that's designed to play man. They haven't been getting the sacks, the pressure on the quarterback. Of course, I think to a degree the tight ends have been just absolutely killing us this year. 300 yards in the first half this past game against the Colts, and 29 points in the first half. You can't overcome that. And when the defense is just that porous, you're going to look bad. And the offense, the pressure is going to fall on the offense, and you won't be running the ball. You can't keep to your identity. And I think a lot of people like to point their finger at Blake Bortles and, blame him for, the lack of big play or, the points that, is expected, like what he played against the Patriots. But, if you go back and you take a look, they were a little bit more disciplined as far as, that West Coast style offense, keeping it to that instead of trying to force the ball down the field. And To an extent, I think you can also point your fingers at the wide receivers. We're actually tied for second in the league in drops. Keelan Cole has not played to the expectation that you would really expect from a guy who was expected to be the number one receiver on the team. It's a total turnaround, and you just don't know what to expect with this Jaguars team. They show up one week, and then, they really haven't shown up a lot over the last last 5 games. But, I think going into this game, the one thing that you do have to watch for is, they're starting to get healthy on the defensive side. I know Smith, he's been playing hurt with his shoulder. Ramsey's been playing hurt with his knee. And Bouye actually had an issue with his, I believe it was his ankle. But, it looks like he's going to be all good to go this week. Hayden in the slot, and that's another thing you can take a close look at. Last year we had Aaron Colvin in the slot, and he was primarily somebody who would cover the tight end, and we just haven't had that as far as covering the tight end. But overall, I think that we're starting to mesh. But last week in the second half against the Colts, they really pulled it together and didn't allow any points in the second half, and came back and almost put themselves in a position to tie it up. But the fumble at the end of the game actually just completely, ruined the comeback. But they had that feel like the 2017. I think they're starting to get their wheels under them, but I think it's a little, too late. But if they do start picking up wins here and there, they could possibly see, a playoff chance, but it's very slim at this point.
So everything that you were talking about, from what it sounds like to me, is that everything that has happened to this point this season is just kind of like the perfect storm. You've got injuries, you've got maybe poor coaching, changing in schemes, you've got, guys who are underperforming. It's been about as bad as it can get everywhere.
Yeah. And, you hope that it gets better, and then, somebody goes down and gets hurt, there's just been a lot of disappointment this year, but you just keep hoping. You look back at 1996, when the Jaguars made their first playoff run, they were actually 3-6, on that week 10 bye, and they turned around and, only lost 2 games and finished the season 9-7 and made a run for the AFC Championship game that year. I guess you can say that it's never over until the Fat Lady sings, but, you always expect when when things are going as badly as they have been, you can kind of see the pattern working.
Mm-hmm. Now, let's talk a little bit about Blake Bortles, because you kind of alluded to it earlier. Everyone in the national media seems to be kind of jumping on him, but I did a little bit of digging, and I know statistics aren't everything, but you look at his stats, it's not really that different from what we saw from him last year. He's kind of really at his career average, and I mean, he's never been the kind of guy to light up the scoreboard, but we saw at his best last year the kind of game manager, the guy who can make a few plays when you need it. He can be effective. And I think it might be unfair that he's being criticized the way he is. And you talked about all the injuries to the offensive line. I mean, I guess you already kind of answered the question, but is the criticism on him completely fair?
I think, when there is criticism, there's a little, where there's smoke, there's a little bit of fire. But, for the most part, you can't blame him for the total, failure that, the whole team has had this year. I think that there's been a lot of pressure put on him when, the whole offense was designed around Fournette. And when you design an offense around one person, if he's not in there, then I think they tried to lean on him a little bit too much. And I think he's come through at times. But, a lot of times the wide receivers have dropped the ball in third down situations. So, I know if I was out there and I threw the ball to a guy expecting him to catch it on a third down play that would, result in a first down. I'd have a hard time, trusting the guy the next time, but he comes right back out and he tries it again, So I think there's just been too much emphasis on Bortles. He hasn't played, like, Peyton Manning style, quarterback play, but, those guys are too few in between. There's not, those all-star quarterbacks out there. I think he's a serviceable quarterback, but you can't blame him for the full team's, problems.
And you talked about Fournette being the key cog on the offense this year, as he was for much of last season too. He just got healthy. They traded for running back Carlos Hyde last month, and they have T.J. Yeldon, who's been serviceable. He's obviously not the premier guy that Fournette has been, but now you've got a collection of three guys that can at least play in this league, three guys that have been starters at some point. I know Fournette is the lead guy, and I want to hear your thoughts on just how important he is and what he does for you, but is there a way you can use all three of those guys?
Yeah, absolutely. Just like this past week, the offense was really ticking, and I think that's because they used the personnel properly. When Fournette was out there, his presence was known, and I think it was because he was fresh. Last year, a lot of times you see him come alive in the first half, but then he disappears in the second half. I think that, I think they're going to be able to use all three of those guys really well. They like to get Yeldon out on the edge, toss it to him and let him, go to work. Fournette, he's more of your downhill style guy, but also he can change direction, and take off. And where Carlos Hyde is, your first down running back, you hand him the ball and he just runs angry. So I think, Carlos Hyde and Fournette are a lot alike, where, Yeldon is kind of that scat back where you can kind of get him out on the edge. But Fournette, he's you take a look all year, he's been missing, and, the offense hasn't played that well except for against the Patriots. But it's vital when, to have your guy in there. And I think that when he's in the game, it gives you, a better chance to win for sure.
As far as the defensive struggles go, it's almost tough to call them struggling from the outsider's perspective a ton, because they still are statistically one of the better pass defensive units in the league according to passing yards against. But you alluded to their struggles to get pressure, their changes in defensive scheme, injuries to guys like Telvin Smith, who is still leading the team in tackles by a substantial amount. But let's talk a little bit about what I believe personally to be probably the most important part of the defense, and that you talked about, and it's the pass rush. And guys that, starred last year, like Calais Campbell, he has just 5 sacks. Yannick Ngakoue has 5 sacks. Dante Fowler Jr. was traded, and they only have 19 sacks as a team after having, what was it? They had like 50 sacks last year? Like, what's going on?
Yeah, exactly. And I think you can really point your finger toward the coverages. Last week in the first half, there were a lot of breakdowns as far as missed assignments. Ebron flipped past Telvin and Barry Church several times, and it resulted in, the 3 touchdowns that he wound up putting up there. But, I think that's where it hurts you the most, is when the quarterback drops back and he's got, more than 3 seconds to pass, that hurts. But when he takes, 2 steps back and the guy's wide open, you're never going to get that pass rush. And the zone defense that they're playing now, and if you go back and you take a look last year, take a close look at the corners and where they're playing. Last year, they played right up on the line, and they pressed hard, and you press the wide receivers hard coming off the line. And, of course, that disrupts, their route, and it allows the front 4 to get to the quarterback a little faster. This year, you take a look at it, the corners are playing back about 5 yards and then waiting for the wide receivers to run to them, then they press them. And I think that's causing a lot of issues as far as, the down 4 getting to the quarterback. They're having to, run more blitzes and stuff like that. And when you're throwing, 5 guys, at the quarterback and you're playing zone, there's going to be somebody open. And, that's been the issue the past at least 4 weeks, especially when they played the Eagles. The tight ends ran free. A lot of missed assignments. Miles Jack would go on a blitz and, Barry Church would fill in. And next thing you know, the tight end's up over top of the safeties. And you just can't have that kind of stuff in the NFL. You see it a lot in college, but when you got guys made, to play that press man coverage and let the, front four wreak havoc, that's the main difference I've seen over the last 2 years. And, I've said, after about the fourth game that they lost, and I said, there's just something not right here. I went back and I watched every game last year and, compared the defenses, and they're just playing, the different kinds of coverages, and it's horrendous. I don't know what other way to put it, but yeah, they're just they're not playing the press man coverage they were last year, and I think it's really hurting the front four.
Well, let's get into Sunday's game a little bit. And the Jaguars had a formula that worked twice against the Steelers, and I want to point this out. I'm not sure if you know this, but the Jaguars are the only team to have ever beaten the Steelers at Heinz Field twice in a season, and they've done it twice. Did you know that?
Oh, yeah. Yep.
Yep, 2007 and 2017, obviously last year. The first game, it was kind of a defensive struggle early on, and then, the Jaguars' defense just kept picking off Ben Roethlisberger, 2 pick sixes, and then at the end of the game, Leonard Fournette was running wild. And then the playoff game was just, it was an incredible start for the Jaguars. They put up 21 points in the blink of an eye, a fumble return for a touchdown, and they ended up winning by the final score of 45-42. But it was clear on defense, it was, turnovers, forcing Big Ben into mistakes, and on offense, it was just absolutely run over the Steelers' defense. Is that something that you see? Is that the same formula they're going to need to win this time?
I really do. I think, anytime that, Pittsburgh loses, you don't see much of Big Ben out on the field. If you're successful in keeping, the quarterback off the field, it's hard for the other team to score. So I think, it's vital for them to run the ball and not allow Ben to run the score up on him early. It's just going to be a matter of, if they're able to get the pressure on Big Ben like they did last year. If they don't, I think it'll be a long game for the Jags. But if they're able to run the ball well and get after, the quarterback, I think that it'll be a close game. But, over the last 5 games, I don't see anywhere where, the Jaguars really, have that ability to, run the score up like they did last year. I think it's going to be more of a close game. And if not, I think the Steelers win it.
Well, going into key matchups, who is one guy on offense and one guy on defense that you're watching on the Jaguars? It could be anybody. It could be Blake Bortles himself, or it could be, the left tackle or something, or, just 2 guys that stick out in your mind in this game.
Yeah, I think, the one thing that you do have to, the one person I'm actually watching is going to be Fournette. If he has a big game, against the linebackers, I think that, that offense is going to be really ticking. On defense, it's going to be those linebackers. They haven't played, really well this year. And I think, watching Barry Church and Telvin Smith over the last, 6 games, you kind of hope that they're going to cover better this week. If they don't, then, it's going to be a lot to the tight end in the slot.
You alluded to it a few moments ago when you talked about the Jaguars' best chance for winning is kind of shortening the game, getting on the Steelers early, allowing your offense to be balanced and making the Steelers have to play from behind. If you're winning the toss on Sunday, are you taking the opening kickoff?
I would actually kick it, and tell the defense, do your thing. I would, and then if you do get the chance to score before the half, that's you get another chance once you come out. So I think if it was me, I'd kick the ball, see if the defense can hold them up off the first series, and hopefully the offense can do something after that. But I would kick it, see what you got on defense.
I will normally I would think about wanting to get the ball first, but given the fact that it's kind of weird. This is kind of forming up to be a kind of a trap game for the Steelers. We know the Jaguars have been a bad matchup for them in past years, especially last year, as we saw the Jaguars were the better football team through in and throughout. And
yep.
It's not just the fact that they're a bad matchup, but it's also the Steelers are flying high after winning a big game on Thursday. They've got a little time off. They were told not to come back until Wednesday because they were so happy with that big win over the Panthers on Thursday. I feel like this has the making to be one of those games where the Steelers just come out slow. And that's the other thing. The Steelers did come out fast on Thursday, and they had another game against the Falcons where they came out early and quick. But most of this season, they haven't been good in the first quarter. In fact, the first quarter has been their worst quarter all year. So if the Jaguars want to get on defense early, that could be the time to force the Steelers into some mistakes. We know how the Steelers sometimes struggle on the road, especially against teams that they think that they should beat. So I think this could be another one of those games. And if you're going to get sloppy played, the turnovers are key. Give me a number, I guess, over, under, I don't know. What do you think is the crucial number? If the Jaguars get, say, 2 or 3 turnovers, is that going to be enough to win? What's that magic number for turnovers?
Let me see. I think if they can get in Big Ben's head early on in the game, and they can get two turnovers, I think that would definitely put it a little bit more into the Jag side. I think that 2 mark is definitely it. If they can turn it over and get a score off of it, that makes it even better. But I'm looking for 2 turnovers.
All right. With everything in mind and the way we've been talking about this game, how do you see this one playing out on Sunday? It looks like, again, on paper, everyone should be probably going to be talking about the Steelers winning big, but I think you and I both know better than that. This is probably going to be a close game, so let's hear it. What's your final score prediction?
Yeah, being that it's in Jacksonville, statistically, Blake Bortles has played well in Jacksonville. So I think, honestly, I think that he's going to have a big game this week. And I think the score itself is going to be close, but I think the Steelers inch it out 23-20.
All righty. Is there anything else you wanted to add? Anything you forgot about before we wrap this one up, Josh?
No, I think that's it. I think we've hit all areas.
All righty. Josh, thank you so much for joining me again this year. It was a pleasure having you on last year, and it was obviously a pleasure having you back this year. And I really enjoy getting the chance to talk with you about this.
Yeah, I always enjoy coming on your show.
All righty. Thank you so much. And ladies and gentlemen, as always, thank you for listening to the Stronger Than Steel podcast. We always appreciate your support, and we hope you have a terrific night. Thank you, as always, for listening. Have a great night.
You have been listening to Stronger Than Steel podcast. Thank you for joining us today, and don't forget to check out our website listed in the description below.